Our goal today is to get you to put the shear clamps on your boat, and that's what these little notches in the forms are for. So I have things on the strong back here that are not permanently set up. I wouldn't do that to you. I'm going to show you how I did that. But I wanted to show you the end game. This is where we're going with all this, right? So there's a couple of things that I should show you that'll start to make sense from the plans. First off, when you are doing your mounting on the strong back, I made the mistake in the DVD previously of actually taking measurements and showing the measurements. I'm not going to do that because what that did is, I can't tell you how many people called up and said, geez, measurements on my boat don't match what's in the DVD. That's because we don't have a DVD for every single boat, right? So I'm not going to give you exact numbers, but I'm going to tell you on your plans, it will tell you where every single one of these forms goes on the strong back. I'm going to show you how to take that number, interpret, and put it on the strong back itself, okay? Now, as we did, this is a little piece off the end of one of the stems, the inner stem to be exact. So it's 3 deep, right? The outer stem is 2 deep, the inner stem is 3 deep. And we had a line on those forms that showed you to cut to here. This is why, because now if you look at it, you will see, once I put my inner stem on here, it's gonna come down and pretty much exactly match this form right here, okay? Now, what that does for me is it allows me to shape the boat right into the first form, and we'll go over that in a little bit, but that's why we did this here. All right, so I'm going to take these off, I'm going to show you how I do the measurements, and I'm going to show you how to put these on, not aligned, but just enough so that we can do our shear clamps. You don't want to do any alignment until you're done doing all your work on the boat. The last thing you do is alignment, and then you start to put the strips on the side. All right, so let me show you how I did this. All right, I'm going to start with putting, now this boat doesn't have a center form because there's an even number of forms, right? So it can't be a center form. But after you do your measurements, I know I got a 10-foot boat. I know the strong back is slightly shorter than that. This particular one is about just over 9 feet. All right, so the first thing I do is I draw my center line here. And then from off of that, I come each form, right? So, and again, all on the plans. So I have a nice dark line here for you to see, and it's marked number 3. So I'm going to take the number 3 form, and I'm going to put it on here. Now, all these center lines that we spoke about, this is where they all start to line up. All right, so I have a center line here, a center line down here, a center line here going across the strong back, and a center line going down the strong back. I line them all up, and the form's in the exact place that I need it to be. So then all you have to do is I have these 2.5-inch deck screws here, and I'm going to zip them right down into the block. Okay, and now I'm going to work from here forward. So the next one is obviously number 2. So again, I just take the number 2 form, line it up each way with all the center lines, and then I just zip it down. Now, as long as your blocks were put in so that they were nice and even with the tabs here in the forms, they're going to go down approximately right. And again, we are going to align all these later. To get a better fit. Okay, so the stem forms, they're just a bit of a different story. I have to align my stem form to butt up against my last body form here. And I want this obviously to be right down the center of the boat. You don't want it to be left and right. That's really critical. So this step you got to pay close attention to. I have what amounts to is exactly a 3/4 inch piece of plywood that I'm using my stem form for. So what I want to do is take this ruler, and I am going to, on each side of my center line here, I'm going to go over 3/8 of an inch and make a mark. All right, and then I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to do it again. Again, 3/8 each side of my center line, is going to give me 3/4 inches total. And then I need to connect the two. And I'm going to do that with a nice dark line so that you can see exactly what I'm up to here. Change it. So coming right from that last body form all the way down to the end of the strong bag. Nice dark thick line. And I'll do the same thing for the other side. So what that now gives me is a visual reference down the center of the strong back where I can see that line just barely on both sides of this particular form, which will tell me that I've got the form going straight down. Now if you need to, handy little trick is take a razor knife and just cut away some of this paper. So I'm going to do that so the line is easier to see. All right, now I can clearly see the line on both sides of the form. I know it's dead center, and I know what I need to do to get this thing on here, which is use glue blocks. So let me grab the hot glue gun. I'm going to show you how I do that. Hot glue gun, regular crafter's glue. Don't want to get the copper in this stuff too strong, too tenacious. It'll be a real son of a gun to get it off. And there's the small block. And I'm going to put glue here, and I'm going to glue down the side. Now before you do that, you need to, assuming that you have a 90-degree angle on your stem form here, you need to basically push it up so that the first form, in my case form 2, is flush all the way up and down, right? And that's where this will sit. So I've got it in place. I see the line on both sides. So now I'm just going to take this glue block here, put some hot glue on it, and I am going to glue this in place. And just hold it for a few seconds so it gets nice and strong. And now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. And the easiest place to put the first one is right opposite the one you just put in so that you can push them close together. Good. Okay, give that a few seconds to dry. Now I'm going to push this up, and I need to make sure that it is centered here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my ruler again, and I'm going to get a pencil, and I'm going to mark dead center of this form, which, because it's 3/4 of an inch, will be right at the 3/8 of an inch mark. Now, I'll make that nice and dark so that you can see it. All right, so now that that's dark enough, I'm going to take another glue block, put some glue on it, make these two come together, and then attach my block. And then just kind of hold it for about 60 seconds while it all gets nice and tight. All right, that's dry enough to stay. So now I'll just do the same thing on the other side. Now you can't see because you're on the wrong side of the boat. But basically I just took a razor knife and I stripped away the paper where I was applying the glue block so that it doesn't simply fail by pulling the paper away from the form. Okay. There, looking good. Now because these stem forms are kind of long here, I'm going to go down. I'm going to put a glue block here and here on either side to make sure that I don't have a lot of wobble, because I'm going to be putting my stems on here and shaping them. It's going to want to wobble around. I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to strip a little bit more paper off this side, and then we'll apply a couple more glue blocks on this. All right, so the only thing you really have to consider when putting these glue blocks on is these little partial forms that are going to go on here. The reason they're on the plans are the way that they are, you know, I had a dotted line here and I had a straight line here, and you can see that I've cut to the dotted line. And that was a 3/8 inch space. So 3/8 cut off of this one, 3/8 cut off of the other one, that gives me 3/4 of an inch here. So now when I mount this thing, so that my shear line and my water line all matches up, you can see that when I put my stem piece in here, this is going to be flowing right up to the tip of the stem just perfectly. So when we shape everything, it's going to be great. And we're going to put these on basically the same way we put this on using hot glue blocks. So when you put these hot glue blocks on this form, make sure that they're out of the way because you know that these are coming. All right? Good. Now we're just going to continue down to the other end of the boat doing the same thing, but there's one special change when we get down there, and I'm going to show you what that is. All right, so we are down to the last form now, and this particular boat is form number 4, but we got a problem, right? I haven't told you which side of the line to line all the forms up. Easy. It doesn't matter, as long as you are consistent. But the problem is okay, so these are consistent all the way down. If this was a 16-foot boat, you'd have 4 or 5 more of them. But the problem is when I get here, how do I put my stem piece on, right? So that does become a problem. All right, well, what I do know from the plans is that it's 18 inches between these two forms, right? So 18 inches from any singular point on this form to a singular point on this form. You have to understand that when we do plans, we're doing them on a CAD system, and that's a perfect world, right? The thickness of the forms when I'm lofting something out is 0, absolute 0. So what that means is as long as you measure from the same point here to the same point here, you're good to go. So the face closest to the stem to the face closest to the stem, we want that to be 18 inches. All right, so how are we going to accomplish that? Well, it's relatively simple, although sometimes it's hard to get your head wrapped around it. I know that this form is exactly 1/2 of an inch thick. Okay, so if I look here, well, the backside or the form closest to the stern of this particular boat is the form that's lined up with that line, right? Because if you look down close down here at the end of the tab, you will see that we line the tab up to the black line, and the outside face of the tab is the same thing as the inside face of this particular form. So my goal is to get the inside face of this form 18 inches from the inside face of this form. Okay, well, in order to do that, when I line this up the same way I lined up the other forms, I have this face here even with the line, which is even with the tab. And I want this face to be even with that line. So all I have to do is back it off the thickness of the form. All right? So I'm just going to simply set that aside. There we go. And I'm going to measure a 1/2 inch back. There and there. And swipe a line. And there's my new line. All right, so now if I put this form up here and I line the tab up with that line, the new line that I just put on there, I can now see that this side is even with that line, which is the same thing I have here, right? Now you may be asking yourself, why the heck is he going through all this? Why doesn't he just take a tape measure out and measure it? Because I guarantee you that if I measure from here to here right now, it won't be 18 inches because these haven't been leveled yet. So they're falling forward, they're falling backwards, they're doing all kinds of crazy things. The only thing that I can trust is that line on the strong back. All right, so I do trust it, and I am going to zip this final form down. So I'm hoping that you notice that when I do my center lines on these things, I've got center lines literally everywhere. And they go down on both sides of the blocks here. And the reason for that is so that I can line the center lines up on both sides so that the forms don't cant. Don't skimp on the center lines. Put them everywhere. Even if you don't need them, put center lines down because there's a good chance that it's going to help you out somewhere through here. But at a minimum, center lines all the way around the buttress blocks, all the way around the tabs, and on both sides of the forms. Okay? Because we're nowhere near done playing with those center lines yet. Okay, so just to give you an idea why you don't want to use that tape measure, if I throw this up here now, you can see I've got, oh, at least a 1/4 inch gap from top to bottom. So if I push it backwards, that gap goes away, and so that's why you don't want to use your tape measure to figure out what we just did. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and put this stem on the exact same way we put the other one on. Now I got to attach these little partial forms here. And again, this is just a matter of making these lines. It's probably easier if I hold it sideways for you. You can see the lines just continue right on down. Right, so I need to line them up just like that and glue these on. So I'm going to start by putting some glue right down the side, and then carefully line up my lines and just hold it for a minute. Alright, so all my lines are pretty much lined up here. I'm happy with that. And now I'm just going to do the same thing to the other side, and then I'm going to put a couple of blocks on it to hold it on there nice and tight. So you can see over here on this side that I've gone through the trouble of marking my lines to make sure everything lines up. Now in theory, it just should, but in practice, I just like to be careful. Alright, so I'm going to do the same thing at the other end of the boat now, and the only thing I'm going to add is I'm going to add a couple of blocks to either side of these to make them nice and strong, because what I do like to do on tiny little boats like this where it curves in a lot, which pretty much describes most of the kayaks, I like to bevel this form here. Now I don't typically worry about these because the strips lie flat enough, but as you start to come into the sides here, you want to bevel that in. We'll go over that a little bit later, but when I do that, I bevel using a belt sander, which causes a lot of vibration, a lot of movement, so I'm going to go ahead and block these up. All right, good.